The following program is made possible by Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
More than 17 months ago, the state of California began shifting prison inmates to county jails, a cost-cutting measure called Realignment.
We talk with 3 leading law enforcement officials and get a report card on realignment, what's working and what's not. The game is crime and punishment. The game is on.
I'm Kitty Lopez.
And I'm Mark Simon. Welcome to the game.
For years, the state has faced a federal mandate that it reduce overcrowding in the prisons. And Governor Jerry Brown's answer was realignment. Send nonviolent, non-sex offenders back to local jails where they could be rehabilitated and return to their local communities.
We revisit the topic and get a report card on realignment from 3 San Mateo County law enforcement officials who have had to make realignment work or have had to try. District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe, Presiding Judge Robert Foyles, and San Mateo County Sheriff Captain Tom Gallagher, who's part of the realignment team. Welcome back to the game. Thanks for joining us. Let's start with the open-ended question. Is it working? Is realignment doing what it's supposed to do? Steve?
Yes, it has accomplished it so far, what they wanted to do. The effect of it, that's still to be determined. But in terms of the goal, move the prisoners out of state prison, get them back to the county, and have the new system of sentencing go in place, yes, it's been implemented. The effect to be determined.
Gentlemen, your
I agree. Jury's still out on this one. We're in the process. What realignment was an economic decision by the state after years of overcrowding in the state prisons and federal lawsuits. We had to the state figured it was time to move those folks back on the local level. We now have more felons in the county. Some are incarcerated, many are not. And we're in the process of working to make sure the public remains safe. A lot of that will go, we won't have the stats on this for a while, but right now it's still a work in progress.
Yeah. Tom, let me ask you, because it sort of starts and ends maybe with the jail.
Sure.
When we did the show a year and a half ago, the sheriff was on, talked about the capacity of the jail, which is in the neighborhood of around 840. It's supposed to be routinely is closer to 1,000, even 1,100, before you start to run into your own legal problems about how many people you're housing and what you're doing with them. The expectation was that realignment was going to bring, the state said 250. The sheriff was fearful it was going to be closer to 350. What's going on in the jail? Are you bursting at the seams? Are you managing the load? How's it working for the jail?
We have seen an increase in our jail population. Overall, about a 20% increase. We're close to those numbers that the sheriff discussed last time. We're probably on target now that there's another release of inmates in 2013 coming from the state. What we have seen is a definite increase in our female population, which is up probably about 40%. And we attribute a lot of that to the fact that the realignment standards are the nonviolent offenders, and we see more of the females that have gone to prison for nonviolent crimes. So that's made a significant impact in our women's facility.
So the women's jail, is there cause for alarm? Is it getting to the point where you're beginning to worry about whether or not it's simply got too many people in it? There are certain things you can't do. You can't have people sleep on the floor and stuff like that.
Right. The state has certain guidelines and that we have to follow, and sleeping on the floor certainly is not one of those guidelines. We have plans that we could move some of the women to our main jail if it got to a critical point. We're definitely always looking at programs where we can move some of the women into programs outside of the main women's facility. And then of course we've broken ground and started building a new facility to house those females, and hope to alleviate some of the overcrowding from the main jail as well with that facility.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I watched the show in 2011, everybody talked about the money. And Steve, I know you were very concerned that there wasn't going to be enough money. I think it was reported $4.2 million the first year. So how has the money been? Has it been enough?
Well, it's surprising what happened, because we were concerned with that $4.2 million. In the following year, it certainly went up to almost $14 million. for the full year. Remember, that first year was just a partial year.
Right.
Then it went up to 14 million, and we're expecting in the same vicinity this year. In terms of the needs, I think that increase has met our needs. So I think in terms of the money, I mean, nobody's ever going to say you have enough.
Right.
They're always going to say if we had more money, we can do more programming. We can do more to try and move toward the rehabilitation goal here. But it has turned out to be, for instance, the sheriff's office and my office, the first year, we took none of the money, even though we were entitled to it. We said, no, we'll do it within our budgets. Second year, I've obtained some positions to help victims. But other than that, the predominant money is doing what it's intended to do, which is go to try and improve rehabilitation.
One of the principal issues in the show we did in 2011 was about sentencing. And the whole idea, the philosophical idea, and it's a chicken and egg. Which came first, the money or the philosophy? Probably the money. But the idea was you're sending nonviolent offenders, which means largely either drug-related or property crimes that are relatively low level, but they're coming back to the communities in which, in theory, they're from. They're getting a chance to not just be incarcerated, but to focus on programs to make it possible for them not to reoffend over and over again. How's that working from a sentencing perspective and from a reality perspective?
Well, from a sentencing perspective, we're seeing shorter sentences. For instance, drug dealers are part of that non population. So a person who had 4 prior drug sales convictions, who now gets convicted of his 5th, I would have probably sent to prison for 15 years or some number like that. Now that person is getting a split sentence, not in the state prison, but in the county jail. The county jail was built for incarcerating people for up to a year in the county jail. Most of those folks are being sentenced for somewhere around 5 years, perhaps. They'll do 2.5 and be out. So the cost of doing business for a drug dealer has reduced substantially. That also increases the number of such dealers on the streets. And some of these people are business people. They're not really needing rehabilitation. So you have those folks on the street. Couple that with reduction in police force ability, like in East Palo Alto would have. Recently I signed a warrant. There were only 3 police officers on the street and 1 sergeant. With the increase of felons on the street, it's a concern. The only issue I see to rectify that is to fund the probation department so that not only they can use evidence-based practices to help those that need programming, but also to intensely supervise those more serious felons that would normally be in state prison right now.
Well, let me ask both you and Steve, because you said something that was really fascinating. Normally, this guy would have gone to prison for 15 years. Now he's going essentially for 5, not prison. And only 2.5 of that is incarcerated. Does it bother you? Was 15 too much for what he was doing? Is 5 too little, or should there be somewhere in the middle? I know one of the frustrations with things like the 3 strikes law is that sometimes you're sending people away for a long time when in your own best judgment, they may not have really deserved a 15-year sentence. So first question is 15, is it frustrating that you can't send people away for longer, or are you're finding a way to make peace with what's going on? Steve, go ahead.
You know what? You hit it on the head. Frustrated may not be an adequate word for it. Yes, it's for the category the judge just mentioned. Dope dealers. Another one, thieves, major thefts and embezzlements of 100,000, 6-figure embezzlements who are staying local. What's the program that works for them? What's the training rehabilitation program to deal with profit-motivated crimes? The answer is no, there's none for that. It's a thief is a thief. And to that line, and we don't have programming for that. We have programming to help people with drug problems. So yes, suddenly these people, and they know it, we've heard it from them, that they're telling us, yeah, hey, now it's just become the cost of doing business, and doing local time is so much easier than going off to the state pen. So it's frustrating to us in terms of where we have the concern this may fail, and that is that for these type of people, that the crime will continue to go up, and that's a concern.
We're going to come back to this question, and we're going to take a quick break, Judge. Stay with us, all 3 of you, and you stay with us. We'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more, In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back to the game. I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Kitty Lopez.
And we're joined by San Mateo County District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe, San Mateo County Presiding Judge Robert Foyles, and San Mateo County Sheriff Captain Tom Gallagher. The whole county's here. Who's running the county? We're getting Steve's perspective on the frustration of not being able to put some people away as long as you used to be able to. Is it something that's bothering the judges too? Or do they also appreciate that they have some increased flexibility where a lot of the sentencing up until this point really took a lot of the discretion out of the hands of judges?
You know, frankly, we had discretion. And there were some areas that we couldn't do certain things. I mean, there were certain defendants that was mandatory that they go to state prison because of the statutes. Now we have greater discretion, but on a certain number of the population, and some of these are the serious theft crimes and the drug dealers, we can't send them to state prison. So our option is how long in the county jail in a facility that wasn't built to send someone for 15 years should I send such a defendant? And that's a concern because I realize if I send that same person that I sent 2 years ago to state prison for 15 years to the county jail for 15 years, it's undoable. It's unworkable. So we come up with a split sentence in which the person gets a reduced sentence in the county jail and then does their mandatory supervision for the remainder of his time. And then the issue is we need to fund probation to be sure that they can supervise intensively such people.
So you can still sentence somebody to 15 years, but you're facing significant pressure simply not to do that because it's just not practical?
There's a practicality issue of it. There is also, you know, right now the jail is over 1,000. It's overpopulated as we speak. There's a hopeful new jail being built, or that we know there's a new jail being built. But if I start putting everybody in for 15 years, you know, you'll need 2 new jails.
Captain Gallagher, there's a difference. There used to be a difference between guys in prison and guys in jail. Guys in prison thought jail was easy time. You had guys in jail who weren't serious criminals, who you still even had a chance to get their lives straightened out, versus guys in prison who pretty much were career criminals and were tough, hardened people. Are you seeing a change in the nature and atmosphere in the jail? Is there a difference because you're getting people now who are more like state prisoners than they are jail inmates?
We're seeing a little bit of a change with the type of population we're getting there. You know, overall, the courts have sentenced people that need to belong in jail into jail, and then others that are able to go into our programs to go out to our programs. So our classification system is such that we keep those, you know, hardened people that can't really work in a program inside the facility, and then we try to keep them busy all the time though. We do a lot of programs inside the facility.
Like what? Give us an example.
So yeah, people can get their general education. We have anger management classes in our facility over on Maple Street, which is, although it's outdated, we do culinary programs. We have a dog training program, which actually benefits both the Peninsula Humane Society and the inmates that are in custody. The problem that we have is, as the judge mentioned, by sentencing people for such long periods of time, in state prison, they have the ability to transfer the prisoners throughout the state, which may not seem like a benefit for, you know, visiting their family members and such, but it is a benefit if they're starting to build up a power base within one facility and they can break up that power base and move it somewhere else. We don't have that ability. So we really need to keep them busy with programs and, you know, hopefully keep them occupied with other things so that they don't develop that more hardcore mentality while they're in there.
What if they don't want to do a program? Do they have a choice?
They do have a choice. I mean, they don't have to participate in a program. You know, the things that are a lot different in county jail versus state prison is they have a lot less freedoms in county jail. I know it sounds funny to have you know, your difference of freedoms when you're locked up, but we don't have televisions inside your individual cells like they do in state prison. There's different types of amount of time they spend in a rec yard. Yeah, so
there's just not as much to do.
There's not as much to do, and it's more structured. But you know, we do it at the same time. We have to keep an eye on our employees because, you know, we're now going to see some people spending time in a facility longer than the employee is going to spend working in that facility.
Well, with the increase in women, you said 40% increase, how have you had to change things due to that?
Well, they've been very creative on the amount of programs that they're offering for the women, and there has been some latitude with the courts to allow other inmates that have been previously sentenced to now move out to alternative sentencing programs that where they would have a work program that they go out and work at, and then they come back and sleep at the facility during the nighttime. And Sheriff Monks has been very aggressive on building those types of programs, and that's what we're centering the whole new facility that we're building is more program oriented for this whole change in demographic of inmate.
A year and a half ago, much of the discussion was dominated by the idea of rehabilitation. Steve, you said a thief is a thief. Do we have, so give us a sense of the scope of the programs. Judge, you said somebody gets a 5-year sentence, it's 2.5 years in custody, 2.5 years in a program. Is it a residential program? Are they out in the community? And what are they learning? And is, the bottom line question, is it seem to be working, or is it, in many cases, something like what Steve said, where a thief is a thief?
Well, our county uses evidence-based practices through the probation department to assess every criminal defendant who has been sentenced, to assess his risk or her risk levels in the county and what type of programming is necessary.
What kind of factors do you weigh when assessing?
We use a case study. It's a test that basically gets administered with the probationee, and through that, and a look at their record and everything else, a program is put together for that individual, and it's an individually based program so that we're not wasting assets for something that isn't necessary. But there might be cognitive training, learning how to prevent the triggers in the future that result in criminal activity. Those kinds of that kind of probationary work gets done.
Let me stop you there. We're going to have to take a break. We'll come right back to this topic. Stick around. We'll be right back.
It's been over 150 years since Wells Fargo first opened for business. Since then, we've enjoyed your community support, and we're passionate about returning it. Every day, Wells Fargo team members roll up their sleeves and donate their time to organizations and charitable groups throughout the Bay Area. Nationally, we've committed even more. In just the past 2 years alone, we've donated over $70 million to support schools and educational programs. It's a commitment we're proud of. Wells Fargo, the next stage.
Welcome back. I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Kitty Lopez.
And we're talking with San Mateo County District Attorney Steve Wagstaffe, San Mateo County Presiding Judge Bob Foyles, and San Mateo County Sheriff's Captain Tom Gallagher about realignment. The state's sending a lot of felons our way, and they're not in the legislature. That's a bad joke. We were talking, Judge, about some of the difficulty you've got in the issues of rehabilitation and whether or not, and I guess we just don't know yet whether or not it's really going to work. But you do an evaluation about what's the right program for somebody, and then ideally you put them in a place where they're going to change their lives and decide, I don't want to be that person anymore. Historically, that starts with something real fundamental. Somebody has to decide they just don't want to be a criminal anymore. Have we got programs that bring people there?
That's part of the process. I mean, as we decide if someone's high risk or not, those who want to get into a program, those who want to change their lives, we need to work with them to do so. And those who don't, then they need to have intensive supervision with a probation officer or a parole agent watching them pretty closely because they won't be in custody.
Yeah.
Is there enough money for those programs, and are there enough programs?
That's the big question. I mean, this is the formula. We reduced court by 31% in our county, 120 fewer employees over the last 5 years, so we've reduced services in all areas. July 1st, we take over the parole, hearing, and revocation business. We reduced the number of police officers on the street, and we increased the number of felons on the street. Now, you asked me at the beginning, is it working? We don't know yet. Hopefully put a lot of money into probation to keep an eye on those who are out on the street that don't want programming and just want to be criminal defendants.
I mean, you really have to, Steve, be able to revoke somebody's probation like quickly and soon. I mean, you have them in a program, it's a good program, you've done your best to design the program so that it's the right one for them, but they got to sign up for it, they got to commit to it, and I would imagine if fairly quickly in the process, they're blowing off meetings, you got to know right away, and you got to be able to round them up right away.
And then you want to be able to have a consequence to follow it. You're right. And if there really isn't a consequence, well, if the most you can do is just going to be a quick little 2 weeks in the jail, well, that means nothing, and it will not deter behavior.
So, and that's the question: is you've sentenced the person to 5 years, 2.5 years in jail, 2.5 years in a program. So the underlying sentence is 5 years. You can't sentence them to like 10 years in prison because they violated probation, can you?
That's right.
Yeah. So let's get back to the real fundamental question. Somebody goes away for 15 years in prison. One of the things that motivates them not to be a criminal anymore is having spent 15 years in prison. Some people figure it out, some never do, but they're coming back here. We're getting serious felons back in our community faster than we used to, and more of them than we're used to. The other part of it that I guess we don't know yet, but I read the newspaper just like the rest of the people. Burglary seems to be on dramatic rise in every county in the Bay Area. Are you concerned that that's the reason why, that we're just getting more experienced and effective felons back in our community, Steve?
I'm concerned about it, but I'm also not taking the position that it has anything to do with realignment yet. That's what the studies need to be done. There's one being done out of Stanford now, there's one being done out of the Central Valley, and one out of Sacramento that hopefully will give us some answers to that. But one thing's obvious, that this spike in theft crimes, burglaries, does coincide with realignment. But I'm not there to say that it is, that's what the cause of it is. We just know it's there. This week, the FBI announced violent crime is up nationwide. Not just in California, but nationwide, 1.2%. Well, there's no realignment in 49 other states, so that's, somebody might want to say, look, violent crime's going up. That would be a misnomer to blame it on that. So we don't know at this point.
What about in the law enforcement side? You've got deputies out. In fact, the sheriff's office has taken over responsibility for law enforcement in a growing number of communities in the county. You see anything that might be related to realignment? And do you see an increase in crime, in particular property crime?
Well, we have seen an increase in burglaries and property crimes, specifically residential daytime burglaries. We do have analysts that we've put as part of the realignment team and exploring that to see, but we have not seen any correlation yet that says that it's somebody that's part of the realignment that is out committing these crimes. The best thing that we have so far is the collaboration between the courts, the district attorney's office, and especially probation, with our information sharing with all the local law enforcement agencies and the sheriff's office, so we can keep track of what's going on out there. We won't know whether or not they're committing these crimes until we catch them. That's when you find out that they actually committed the crime.
Yeah, you actually don't know who they are yet.
We're not sure who they are, so it's you can't just cast blame on one thing, and we can't. But if we switched back to the way that it was and there was a decrease, we couldn't necessarily attribute it to that.
You guys are all experienced veteran law enforcement safety officials. What's your gut tell you? Or do you not want to speculate that way? I shouldn't have given them the out. So where do you think, what's the next big concern? A year ago, you were worried about the funding, and you thought the programs and the words you used were doomed to failure if they didn't adequately fund it. I think we're all a little surprised that they did, and that the funding seems to be keeping pace with the need. What's the next big concern? Is it this area that we're just unleashing a whole new wave of felons in our community, or what's your first concern next, Judge?
Well, July 1st, we start phase 2, and that's where parolees will be released to our county and supervised through the parole division of the Department of Corrections, as well as our probation department. I should say certain levels will be supervised by probation. We will go into the parole revocation business, so I will be doing lifer hearings on people that life terms and determine whether they go back to prison. Wow. For those who get revoked that don't have a life sentence, their maximum sentence would be 180 days in the county jail, which is 90 days in real time, so they're really not getting a very long sentence when they violate. So the incentives, what Steve talked about, are lessened. And this is happening, although the money is here for realignment perhaps, it's been given to the court with one hand, yet the court's been decimated with the other hand from the state in terms of loss of so many resources that we used to have. So it's just not a good formula right now. My hope is those that are supervised get intensive supervision if they need it, and get the help they need if they need it.
Steve, what's your primary concern going forward?
Whether we're going to have one thing. For the people who will take the help, We know it has nothing to do with the court system whether they're going to be successful. It's going to be offering them, and what's that? Jobs and housing.
Right.
If people have jobs and housing, the people who are not criminally oriented are just, they're otherwise good people who do a bad act. With that, we'll help them through. If we don't have that, well then, I don't care what we do. We're going to continue to see crime spiral, and we're going to see more victims. And that's where my concern is. I want fewer victims.
Yeah. We're running short on time, Captain. Your primary concern going forward?
Our county has been very collaborative in our efforts and putting together projects and keeping track of the entire realignment process. I'm just hopeful that the rest of the neighboring counties are doing the same thing, and we don't see a spillover from their counties of persons involved in realignment coming to ours.
Yeah, we don't live in isolation, but we have wealthy communities that tend to attract people who want to steal things, don't we?
Definitely.
Steve Wagstaffe, Bob Foyles, Tom Gallagher, thank you so much for being here. This is a critical topic. I know we'll be revisiting it. I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Kitty Lopez.
Thank you for being with us, and join us next time on The Game.